BioForward felt it was important to have this COVID response update to educate the community. We are, of course, proud of Wisconsin's biohealth industry and research institutions' rapid reaction to combat the pandemic through research and products and services, whether it was directed at testing, vaccines, or therapies against COVID-19. From our emerging growth companies to our large companies, Wisconsin has broad strength across many sectors of the biohealth industry. Today, we're hearing from 9 companies and one of our outstanding research institutions, the Medical College of Wisconsin. Wisconsin has many more companies and researchers fighting this pandemic, but we felt this was an excellent lineup of companies that showcase our response in multiple ways. They come from Madison and Milwaukee regions, and they will provide 5-minute updates, so we'll have time for a Q&A session at the end. One last thing I'd like to mention, please sign up for another great event we are having on July 26th with Phyllis Arthur, VP of Infectious Diseases and Diagnostic Policy for the Biotechnology Innovation Organization known as BIO. Phyllis is going to be presenting a can't miss update on COVID vaccines. Information on the BioForward website. You can go on the BioForward website and it's under the events tab. So now I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Mike Harrison, that won't be having computer problems like me, who manages our Milwaukee office to lead these presentations and moderate the Q&A. And thanks so much for everyone for attending and for everyone presenting today.
Thanks, Lisa. So good morning, everybody. So as you know, BioForward serves Wisconsin's diverse and robust biohealth cluster. And this morning we have 10 great speakers, like Lisa said, that represent a great sampling of BioForward's over 200 members. How today's session will go is I will introduce our speakers one after the other for short presentations about how their company or organization has pushed back against the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. If you have a question during the presentation, please write it in the chat at any time. And if it's to a specific person or company, please note that in the question. And at the end of all the presentations, I will be going through the chat to find questions to pose them to our panel. So please, if you have any questions, post them early and often. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Mr. Tom Foti, the president of the Protein Business Unit at Aldevron.
Thanks, Mike. And hello, everyone. My name is Tom Foti, and I'm very grateful to serve as the president of the Protein Business Unit at Aldevron. I also want to thank BioForward, Lisa, the team, Mike here for helping pulling this together to really showcase these companies. I wanted to recognize the panelists too here. I mean, it shows kind of the gritty toughness of the Midwest of Wisconsin in doing what we can and having a lot of purpose and passion with this COVID response. So anyways, at the end of the day, hopefully we can lead us through this with great science. But moving to the first slide, Risa, I don't know if you can advance for me to the next slide. Aldevron's business model is based off of manufacturing the central dogma of molecular biology. And so we manufacture DNA in Fargo, North Dakota, and everyone knows that you can transcribe that into messenger RNA, which we also make and have recently launched that new platform, and that's translated into a functional protein. And so this is our business model, and we have 550 people that are focused on this every day. And so we can manufacture these things from research grade to GMP, and both for diagnostics and for clinical purposes. And so when COVID hit, we were exceptionally well positioned to do what we can to help basically get through this pandemic with our different partners and clients. And we've worked on over 40 different COVID projects to date. If you move to the next slide, one of the hot topics throughout this entire pandemic has really been supply chain. And so it's pushed the supply chain in a number of ways for all different types of industries. And it's no different with biological manufacturing. And so Aldevron, being a US company and having 2 manufacturing sites in Fargo and in Madison, was well positioned to quickly move forward with supporting a bunch of different partners with producing plasma DNA, IVT enzymes, messenger RNA programs. And as most people know, starting with the sequence, which was known best back a year ago, these things are can be highly adaptable as maybe potential different variants come out. And so, anyways, that is one of the ways that we've been able to support the overall response. Moving to the next slide, there have been several approaches to the vaccine, and dozens of them, and all with different biological approaches. Some have been RNA, some have been plasma DNA based, some have been with protein and the viral cap proteins, and some have been viral vector. And so Aldevron's experience in cell and gene therapy over the last 10 years also had positioned us well to manufacture plasmids at large scale. And on this slide, starting from the left, again, with the sequence, you can synthesize plasmids and amplify them to make viral vectors. And hopefully all these different approaches from a vaccine standpoint will be a toolbox for doctors so that they are able to prescribe the right vaccine for the right type of population, patient segment. So moving on to the next slide, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we've been doing with CRISPR enzymes. And so most people know CRISPR enzymes have been used from a therapeutic standpoint, and we were the first company to produce GMP Cas9. And when this hit, we were able to quickly transition and pivot to making CRISPR enzymes for viral pathogen detection. And so with CRISPR, as you can see in the slide, the virus-specific RNA guide can be coupled with the CRISPR protein and then used to detect SARS-CoV-2. And we can modify that guide if the variant if the virus modifies. But it's simple, it's fast, it can be adaptable. I really wanted to make sure that I was under the 5 minutes for my first presentation here to keep this on track. I know Jen's at the end, so she has plenty of time. But one last comment, I'm super proud of the Aldevron team in Fargo and in Madison. They've really dug in and helped support this. And also wanted to say thanks to the other panelists today. So Mike, I think I'll just move on and go to the next speaker, if that's okay.
That's fine, Tom. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Before I move on, I just wanted to remind all the speakers when you're not speaking to put yourself on mute. There's quite a few of us, so so it's easy to forget. I also wanted to remind everybody that BioForward's members are also research institutions. So I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker, who is from my alma mater, Ms. Cecilia Hillard, the Associate Dean of Research at the Medical College of Wisconsin.
Hello, everybody, and thank you to BioForward for pulling this together, and to Mike in particular for organizing it. So I'm Cece Hillard, as Mike said. I'm a long-term faculty member in neuropharmacology at MCW and also work within the Office of Research. So I wanted to, maybe if we could have the first slide, the next slide. Before I went on to talk about some of our COVID specific things, I always like to take any opportunity to introduce the Medical College of Wisconsin. I am amazed at how many people in the state of Wisconsin don't really know very much about us. We are a freestanding health sciences university with missions in clinical care. The majority of our faculty members are actually clinicians working through primarily 3 of our hospital collaborators. The VA is a Blocky VA hospital, Froedtert Health, and Children's Hospital of Wisconsin. We are educators. We educate MDs. We have about 200 MDs, 250 MDs per class, 200 in Milwaukee and 25 each at 2 regional campuses, one in Green Bay and one in central Wisconsin. We educate graduate students for both the master's and PhD, as well as our most recent school was the addition of a School of Pharmacy. Most important for me as a researcher, research is one of our most important missions, and we currently rank pretty close to the top third of medical schools in the United States in terms of our NIH funding. And finally, being situated in very close to the city of Milwaukee, we're extremely concerned about our community, and we have a very strong community engagement mission that has actually won several national awards. So in addition to the VA and Children's and Freighted, we are also closely aligned with Versity, as well as we share a Department of Biomedical Engineering with Marquette University. Next slide, please. So on to our COVID efforts. So being a pretty mature and multifaceted research enterprise, many of our researchers were able to pivot their studies toward understanding COVID once the pandemic hit. And really we have, I think, important efforts going on across the translational spectrum. If we start all the way over to the left in the basic science category, one of our faculty members had a longstanding research program looking at the interaction with coronaviruses with lysosomal ion channels, which certainly became quite relevant quite quickly. He and others are also working to try and repurpose already known drugs that are known with known safety profiles in humans to reduce infectivity of the SARS virus. On the clinical side, we have multiple clinical trials to which we are contributing, including for remdesivir, for selinexor, which is a cancer agent that has some benefit in reducing SARS, as well as the convalescent plasma collection and distribution in collaboration with Versity. Importantly, because we have quite a clinical population coming to Freighted Hospital with the infection, for a while now we've been biobanking materials from individuals as well as collected at autopsy from those who unfortunately die of the disease. And this is being made available to our researchers for very important and interesting studies. At the population level, we have multiple studies. Our Advancing a Healthier Wisconsin Endowment immediately got some money into the hands of those who are working out in the community so that we have been able to participate in data collection and analysis of infectivity, particularly in the Milwaukee area, looking at PPE distribution, problems, particularly in nursing homes, and then focusing in on COVID infections in vulnerable populations in particular. On the policy level, of course, there's been an enormous need for facts and truth to get out to the public. And we've been doing the best we can to try and provide that expertise, particularly from our epidemiologists, and actually the president of MCW, John Raymond, has been out in the news as much as he possibly can, talking about how to safely protect yourself from the infection. Next slide, please. So just to sum up, I just want to give you my name and email address if you have questions for me, and also to mention Kevin Boggs, who is the director of our Office of Technology Development, who would be very interested in discussing further any of these projects that seem to be of interest to our corporate partners on this call. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cece. It's great to have you share some of the amazing work happening at MCW. I'm glad everyone got to see that. Our next speaker is Randy Nagy, the president and CEO of Genturi.
Thank you, Mike, and I'd like to thank BioForward for having this opportunity for us all to present today. We're very proud to be able to pivot and respond to the COVID pandemic like everyone else on the talks today. For those of you not aware of Genturi, on the next slide, you'll see that we manufacture and supply swabs, there you go, and a lot of kits, things like the sexual assault kits that are used throughout the state of Wisconsin, as well as these collect eject swabs that are shown here. Our focus in the past has been with forensic laboratories using flat cellulose swabs that are used to collect samples at crime scenes and then can be ejected into products like our Swab Saver, as you see over on the right. Earlier this year, we started to design and now provide oral swab collectors that you can see at the top of the screen. And these oral sample collections are designed to optimize the amount of DNA that one can get from an oral sample collection, usually between 5 to 10 micrograms of DNA. On the next slide, you'll see we also provide specimen cards. In this case, you see a Gen Swab where we've combined a oral swab, in this case, a foam swab that is designed to go with the a specimen card. It can go into a regular mail, number 10 envelope off to the point for collection. And to collect the sample, once it's taken, it just flips the swab onto the card, put the wrapper around it to squeeze for about 20 seconds, then transfers the sample to the specimen card. That'll preserve that sample for decades at room temperature. You can see those cards can also be put into a storage box that will preserve those samples at room temperature in a very organized fashion. This box will hold 180 samples, for example. So to move to the next slide, you'll see that in March, we pivoted to COVID-19. And using the expertise we've had with remote sample collection, we were able to work with the Wisconsin State Lab of Hygiene and work with them to QC some of the new kits that we were developing for COVID-19. And once we had the ability, we were able to start QCing our own lots. Very few companies were able to get nasopharyngeal swabs at the time. We were fortunate with our supply chains to be able to do so, and therefore we expanded our production very quickly to help provide kits to a number of Midwest state health department laboratories. We hired about 30 additional employees and moved our facility to Verona. That's about 4 times our previous size. So now we have the capability to produce about 10,000 kits per day at Genturi. If you take a look at the next slide, this is part of our production area where you see one of our 2 ISO 7 certified clean rooms. This has a liquid handler and 4 Sonomics machines in it that are able to label, decap, dispense, and recap the labels onto cryovials and tubes that we use in our kits. In the front part of this screen, you'll see part of our kitting area as well. On the next slide, you'll see that the kits that we actually offer for COVID-19 can be customized to meet our customer needs, whether it's with the viral transport media or PBS, a nasopharyngeal swab or a nasal flock swab. All of these kits are now available to be seen on the FDA website. Our most recent kit we're working with is with the University of Wisconsin, where we've developed a good system for identity traceability using a QR code that's on the bottom of the cryovial to match to the outside label of the kit itself. If you take a look at the next slide, you'll see that in this kit, the sample has a cryovial with a QR code on the bottom of it. And we use that to create the label on the outside of the kit, so there's a good chain of custody. All the student has to do is use their smartphone to hit that QR code, and that takes them right to the university website where they're put in their identification. They're asked to say yes if they want to match the barcode to their sample ID. And once they say yes, the chain of custody is met and away goes the sample. On the next slide, you'll see we're developing some new kits, both for COVID-19 as well as for genetic testing. Our new COVID-19 kits will be using our collected jet swabs. And with those, what happens is you take your swab and eject it into a 2 ml cryovial that has a solution that will inactivate the virus and preserve the RNA. Another version of this will also extract the RNA during the transportation to the laboratory, so it makes the processing the sample even easier. We'll offer other similar kits for this for genetic testing that will preserve the DNA. In a similar way, we'll also have a version that will lyse open the cells and have the DNA available, ready for extraction by the time it gets to the laboratory. So then on the last slide, you'll see that how these kits will look with an illustration of how to make a simple, easy collection from these samples. It has the collector jet swab and the tube for preservation in them. On the last slide is my contact information if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Randy. That's a perfect example of a company that's well positioned to pivot during the pandemic. That was great to hear. Our next speaker is Graham Brierley, the General Manager of Catalent.
Great, thank you, Mike. First of all, I'd like to thank BioForward for hosting this event and for inviting us all to participate. If you go to the next slide, please. I'll give a little bit of an overview of Catalent's facility in the Madison area, and then we'll talk a little bit about the impact of COVID and what we've been doing in response. Catalent itself is a large global contract development and manufacturing organization. Our facility in Middleton is actually part of the biologics business unit. We occupied this building in 2012 and have been in expansion mode ever since. Currently, we're at 240,000 square foot in the main building, with the addition of two new manufacturing suites that are coming online this year. We also have a 40,000 square foot GMP warehouse. The building itself consists of 8 laboratories and 6 GMP manufacturing suites. We've been hiring. Currently, we're at around 400 employees, but we anticipate being at over 500 by the end of the year. The biggest impact that COVID has had really is on our demand profile. We've seen significant demand increases. Go to the next slide, please. So I'll talk about a couple of things. One is our priorities since the beginning of the pandemic back in Q1 of last year have not changed. The first highest priority has been the health and welfare of our employees. And we've been following all of the CDC, World Health Organization, state and local guidelines, and the guidelines coming from our corporate COVID response team. Happy to say we've been fairly successful there. We have a third of our employees working remotely, but for those essential workers that have been working on site, we've actually been able to manage our incident rate of positive confirmed cases to be just under half of the community-based incident rate in Dane County. So our measures are working. The second priority is being continuity of supply to our existing clients. We have a number of programs that have preclinical and clinical stage programs, and obviously continuity of supply there is very important. We've been able to manage that thus far. And then the third one is the actual COVID programs. We have a number of clients whose programs either can be adapted to be used in the fight against COVID, and we'll talk a little bit about that, or they have technologies that we've been able to leverage. So if you look at the various treatments, if you like, there are therapies which treat the symptoms, and we have a couple of clients who have programs there that have actually been accelerated into phase 3 clinical studies, and we anticipate at least one of them getting emergency use authorization very shortly coming up here. There are the traditional attenuated live viruses. We don't have any of those in our facility in Madison. We do have another class which is called virus-like particles, which essentially is the spike protein. We also have some nucleic acid mRNA-based programs. I've been in the industry for 30 years, and one of the things that strikes me is this is an unprecedented times for us. We have a client who had an mRNA-based program unrelated to COVID. When COVID hit, they basically had a different mRNA molecule, different sequence that could be used to create a vaccine against COVID. From the day they contacted us to the day that we started the production of the first GMP batch was 7 weeks. And pause there because 7 weeks, we're replicating a traditional process that typically takes 6 to 12 months, depending on what level of process development has already been done. And to condense that month's worth of work into 7 weeks is just incredible. Probably the biggest challenge we're facing right now is material supply from our vendors. We are seeing lead times significantly increase overnight as people stockpile, and also as vendors are prioritizing supply to companies that are under priority rated orders. Final thing I will say, it's a shameless plug for the site. If you go to the next slide, please. It's just that we are hiring. We have 125 positions that are actively open and posted now. So if you're interested at all, you can go to the webpage there and all of those positions posted are listed. Okay, thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. Yeah, Graham's right. Catalent is hiring, and many of our members are hiring as well too. So please check out BioForward's career site to get some insight into all the jobs that are available. Our next speaker is Melissa Martowitz, the program manager at Gilson. Oh, you're muted, Melissa. Happens to us all.
There we go. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay, hold on just a second. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so most people on this call are going to be very familiar with Gilson pipette men. What happened? Sorry, I had some technical difficulties. Just 1 second, sorry. Okay, so most people on this call are already familiar with the Gilson pipette men. They're standard in most scientific labs. They were discovered by Dr. Warren Gilson, and I actually worked in biotechnology labs for 20 years and used pipettes, and I did not know that Gilson had a whole another line of liquid handling solutions. That's in our automated liquid handling line. So everybody also is probably well aware that there's some supply chain issues with pipette tips during COVID. I'm going to skip that and go into some of the more interesting applications that people are using some of our automated liquid handling for. I have this slide. Some of the other new things that we have out are connected pipettes. They're Bluetooth enabled, and they can be programmed using a tablet for greater traceability. And then we also have standard benchtop instruments. On the next slide, I'm showing some of the different automated liquid handlers. We've been making fraction collectors for a very, very long time. And some of our fraction collectors and the probe-based liquid handlers have been configured with our peristaltic pump to do some viral transport medium filling, sort of like Randy was doing, but like not as high of a throughput. So some of the university labs that are making some of their own kits have been interested in purchase systems for those applications. I'm going to present a case study that goes into the pipette max, so I'll talk about that a little bit more. And there's another system in addition to the liquid handlers that we offer. We have preparative HPLC systems, and the one that I'm showing here is a very specifically configured preparative HPL system that was designed to do oligonucleotide purification. So it can do, it does the purification and desalting. There's 6 valves, so this is all automated to have a continuous process. It has an analytical detector and a preparative detector to do some quality control. And I'm not going to focus on that one today, but I do find it very interesting and exciting that some of the nucleic acid-based vaccine companies and those therapeutic companies that are actively working on it already had these systems installed. So we had to make sure these got some TLC when the coronavirus hit, because it became more critical for those systems to stay up and running for those labs. Okay, the next slide, please. So one of the big sellers during all of this is Pipette Max for qPCR and RT lamp-based assays. The Pipette Max is very well suited for setting up 96 and 384 well plates. So this has been a big area, and you can use it for standard qPCR plate preparation or for these RT lamp assays. If we go into the next slide, go into a little bit more about the Pipette Max. It's basically an automated pipetting system. You can configure it with different heads for volumes of 2 to 1200 microliters. You can run 1 to 8 channels. We have 4 probe configurations. One of the things that people really like about it for the COVID testing is that you can either fit it right into your hood, or it can come enclosed with a PCR, basically a PCR enclosure that has a UV light and HEPA filter. I mentioned, I'm going to talk about it being used in COVID testing, but also the Pipette Max is being used for some smaller kit filling for the enzymatic reactions at several different companies around the world. And as going back to the PCR, we even have software specifically designed to set up a qPCR assay. The software is very flexible, so pretty much anything you throw at it that you could do with a single or multi-channel pipette and a couple 96 or 384 well plates, it's something that Pipette Max would be able to handle. And then on the last slide, I'll show probably Gilson's favorite application for it right now is Shield T3. They're affiliated with the University of Illinois, and their research has developed a saliva-based test. And they install this and run this around the country in a mobile lab. So that middle image is one of the Shield T3 mobile labs on the UW campus where they're running the test. And then on the right side is the inside of that mobile lab. And in the front, you can see the Pipette Max. So when the UW students go in, and they give them the little vial, they spit in it. We designed some special racks for them. And there were certain technical challenges in handling the saliva because it is a bit viscous, and we got that all worked out. Designed their special racks, and now they're up and running. So the Pipette Max is running these tests in these mobile labs. It's it's actually a very robust instrument. It can handle being carried around. Our sales reps but once they're installed, they're not driving this around anymore. It'd be recalibrated after transport. So yeah, the Shield T3 system is allowing an additional 10,000 samples to be tested on the UW campus to kind of keep our students safe. And that's all I have. The last slide has my contact information if anybody has any questions. But thank you.
All right, thanks, Melissa. That's great. Gilson's products are invaluable to so many testing labs and research institutions right now. It's great to see some of the full product line there. Our next speaker is James Hoyes, who's a board member and the strategic advisor to Endacy. James?
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to BioForward. Really appreciate the program today, and it's great to have such a diverse set of panelists, and also appreciative of the audience online. You can jump right into the next slide. So Endacy is a small biopharma. We're based in Mequon. What's been raised so far in terms of our investment capital has been wisely moved from discovery work to the early preclinical, and now we're poised at late preclinical. When the pandemic hit, we really pivoted from looking at neuroscience as some of our areas of focus to respiratory disease as it relates to COVID-19 patients facing acute respiratory failure. So that's our key priority moving forward. And we found that our mechanism on our molecule, Endacy 1308, really addresses two key components of the COVID patient. One is anti-inflammatory activity by upregulating genes related to macrophage phenotype, and the other is potential antiviral properties caused by a reduction in the number of ACE2 receptors, which is the site of viral attachment to the cell in the human body. Next slide. So as you look at kind of the progression of the pandemic, and many of the panelists have already shown how they're addressing some of these initial gaps that the country faced as the epidemic took hold. We're down, kind of in the vaccine, novel therapeutics, and mutating SARS virus space. We know the vaccines are out and very excited about that, and hopefully everyone partakes of it. But we know it's contraindicated in some patients. It may not work as well in some patients. There could be logistical issues or delays. So we still think there's novel therapeutics to treat acute respiratory distress syndrome and acute respiratory failure in patients facing COVID-19, particularly those in ICUs. Next slide. So we have the 3 vaccines approved. We know that, but we also have to remain vigilant on and cognizant of some unknowns that could come up. We want everyone to get vaccinated. Fantastic program, unbelievable speed. Still want to cement efficacy, the duration of effect. Certainly working our way through the manufacturing, logistics, and distribution issues as a country, as well as some societal acceptance and uptake issues. But what we really have our eye on is the virus mutation. We think that's still driving the attachment through the ACE2 receptor, but we want to be poised to make sure there's therapeutics to deal with patients with COVID-19 and not putting all of our eggs in the vaccine basket. Next slide. So I won't go into every detail here on our mechanism of action, but addressing ARDS is critical for these patients, and the mortality rate is very high once patients are on a ventilator, mechanical ventilation in particular, with COVID. And so we think by reducing the ACE2 receptor density, reducing the chance of actual viral attachment and ultimately viral particle release as cells die after they're infected is important. And we think the reduction of the inflammation, and I think you've all probably heard and read of the cytokine cascade that gets out of control. There's been studies on the interleukin system and the complement system that unfortunately haven't panned out at the moment. But we really want to be able to be one of the therapeutics that can lower this risk of the cytokine storm and address the inflammatory action in the lungs. Next slide. As we pivoted, we've been able to take advantage of a number of US government programs. We participated in the CTAP program with FDA and got our IND feedback very quickly, less than 30 days. We've had productive meetings with BARDA and the other government agencies, NIH, FDA, DOD, et cetera, participated in that call, and also had some discussions as a potential medical countermeasure against both mutants of the SARS-2 virus, but also, unfortunately, down the road, if there's a SARS-CoV-3. From those were all positive and gave us great direction as we pivoted, again, away from neuroscience towards COVID. Our next steps and where we are right now, there's 2 small animal studies we need to complete and should get the IND open shortly after that. Again, we've got good feedback from FDA in that regard. We have all of our partners lined up for the phase 1 and phase 1B studies. And as soon as we're in clinical trials in terms of phase 2, that's when BARDA is interested in talking to us again. So we're very pleased with our ability to move quickly in light of the pandemic, position Indice 1308 as a molecule onto COVID patients. And we think the urgency to find treatments as well as the multiple pathways you can use to accelerate approval are both big benefits as we move towards ultimately trials in humans, approval, and then commercialization. So appreciate the opportunity to speak today. From a contact standpoint, you can go to our website and reach us through that. I think that's on the next slide. And just in ending, again, thank you to everyone. Indice's, actively working to get the options, treatment options for the COVID patients, and it's certainly aligned with the passion we have for patients in all of our potential therapeutic areas to really make a positive impact on their health outcomes, and in the case of COVID, improving mortality.
All right, thanks, James. Indice is a great example of some of these companies that I don't think many people are aware are doing incredibly important work. Up in Mequon, there's things like this happening.
That's right.
Our next speaker is Scott Larravee. He is the Associate Director of Corporate Affairs for Exact Sciences.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for joining. I don't have a slide deck to walk you through. I thought I'd just tell a little bit of a story about how Exact Sciences got involved in kind of COVID testing. And for those of you that don't know, Exact Sciences is a worldwide team of about 5,000 people dedicated to finding earlier answers in the fight against cancer. So we are a cancer detection company. You might be asking yourself, well, why did you get involved in COVID? And that's really the story and that I'd like to share today. You know, what started for us as something that we were looking at doing to protect the health of our own employees and keep our lab operating when the pandemic started to break out, very, very quickly turned into thinking about how could we support the public health response. And, you know, I think it speaks to the ecosystem and the relationships that exist in this state and that you see through this organization and others. You know, it really started for us in early March when our CEO started talking to Judy Faulkner, CEO of Epic, and Bill Linton, the CEO of Promega, and I think they all kind of arrived at the same conclusion that, you know, this is going to be a big deal and we are in a position to help. And really that's where we started off, and we looked at, you know, Exact Sciences has the ability to do this type of testing. It certainly wasn't something we were doing at the time, obviously. I think everybody was doing about 0 COVID tests in March, but they reached out to kind of the governor and Secretary Designate Palm and found open arms and just, you know, a willingness of the state to really put the full weight of the state government and the National Guard behind this effort to figure out how do we get people tested? Because if you can remember all the way back to March of 2020, it was how are we going to get people tested and how are we going to scale that and do something that basically none of us had been in the business of doing. So mid-March, I go home. I've been in this home office since mid-March. The folks in the lab go to work. They did what would normally take months in weeks, you know, what would normally take weeks in days. I think you heard that earlier from Graham and others about just kind of the timeline that people moved on, and it was a remarkable, remarkable timeline. So our staff and engineers really retrained our equipment that normally looks for DNA associated with colorectal cancer. If you're not familiar with Exact Sciences, you might be familiar with our Cologuard non-invasive colorectal cancer screening test. So that's looking for DNA associated with colon cancer. Basically had to recalibrate, retrain, whatever layman's term you want to put on it, to look for coronavirus instead of colon cancer. And that's what they did. And they were able to quickly stand up accurate, high volume COVID testing alongside with great support from Promega and Epic. And we also had other Madison companies get involved that you might not think of. So we have project managers working on this from American Family Insurance and CUNA Mutual Group. So this was truly, in my mind, what is great when you have public-private collaborations that work. So Promega supplied the reagents, Epic layers on the software capabilities to where if you fast forward to today, we're getting about 90% of COVID orders being done electronically, which is great to see and just speeds things up overall. You know, and then it becomes something that just quickly grew and really was everyone pulling together. And I want to make clear that this is not just an Exact Sciences story. This is a state of Wisconsin story. I just looked, the state says there are 137 labs doing testing. Exact Sciences is proud to be contributing a big number to that. But, you know, this is a statewide effort that really was built up very quickly and is something that I hope we'll all take pride in. I think, you know, just knowing how our employees worked around the clock and how hearing all these stories, everyone's employees worked around the clock to really respond to COVID-19 is something that speaks to kind of just the spirit of the biotech industry and where we can go. You know, if I look at where we're at Exact Sciences, we went from, you know, basically doing 1 million tests within our first kind of 3 months of doing testing. We did a 1 million tests in the third quarter of last year, and we continue to support the state testing effort. We are now expanding some of our offerings to include the ability to screen for COVID and flu, so seasonal influenza. There's a lot of concern about a twindemic. Fortunately, influenza numbers are low right now, but have added the ability to have folks who work with us order both a COVID flu panel, and we're really just hoping to keep contributing to this effort. But candidly, we hope that as quickly as we got into the COVID business, we'll be out of the COVID business, because it means that we will have solved this. And I think we've seen that testing alone isn't going to do it. This has proven to be, this virus is quite the nemesis, and is not anything that any one company or one group's going to do, but we're very proud to have been able to support that, and then hope to really support it, especially through the lens of helping people get screened for cancer. And we don't want folks missing doctor's appointments and things like that, which we have seen during the pandemic. And so we view COVID testing as complementary to our work around cancer, and hopefully it's a success story that we can all take pride in, but hopefully soon be in the business of going back to being more fully focused on just our core business of earlier cancer detection. We do, like others, we are hiring. So I encourage you to go to our careers site if you'd like to, at exactsciences.com. But maybe more relevant to some of the folks on this call, we do provide COVID-19 testing solutions, not just to the state of Wisconsin, but businesses and health systems and the like. So if you're looking to work with us, you can visit exactlabs.com, or you can call 844-570-9730 and talk to folks. And again, this is something we're doing. We've talked with businesses interested in kind of return to work planning and how testing may fit into that. So these are things that we're feeling out, and I think we're all learning as we go along the way, but we're proud to be able to provide that in our state, and to work with so many great folks on this call and in this organization that have really made a positive difference. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Scott. I mean, it's a great story of a very rapid public-private cooperation that I don't think we've seen in an extremely long time. Our next speaker is one of our newest BioForward members. Please welcome Omer Ahmed, the Chief Strategy Officer of Nexus Pharmaceuticals.
Thanks, Mike. And I'd also like to thank everybody on the panel, as well as all the attendees and BioForward for giving us this opportunity to showcase everything that we're doing and what's going to be hopefully in our future in the near term. To give everybody some background on Nexus Pharmaceuticals, we're a fully integrated pharmaceutical company, and our real specialty is injectable products, institutional based sterile medication. And our tagline is connecting molecules to medicine. That kind of really encapsulates everything we do, where we start from our R&D phase to FDA approval all the way to finished dose manufacturing. And we really pride ourselves on bringing products to market that not only address a current need, but also improve the way the industry practices and delivering ultimately what is the highest quality of care to the patient. On the next slide, I'd like to highlight some of our current products that are being used in COVID supportive care. Like a lot of people have mentioned on the call, if we rewind about 18 months, nobody thought this was going to happen, and we were just among those companies. So, first I'd like to highlight our isoproterenol product, normally used in pacemaker detection, but then there's several studies that show the cardiovascular risk that's associated with COVID-19, and a lot of the different effects that it can have on the heart as well as the overall cardiovascular system. And so we saw an increase in demand for this product in place of trying to speed up people's hearts that were slowing down, and especially in the beginning phases over the summer, where we were really trying to figure out what was ultimately going to be the best course of care for patients in this relatively new disease. On the left, our newest approval is for product succinylcholine, which is used as a muscle relaxant during ventilation. And I'm sure we all have the memories of how critical it was and how much ventilation and ventilators were being used surrounding the initial surge of the pandemic. But on top of that, all of the medication that's required to keep somebody ventilated long-term. Normally clinicians don't like to keep people ventilated for more than a few days, but we were looking at weeks at a time, which really put a huge strain on the supply chain for medicines such as succinylcholine. And I think, speaking on a broader sense, as we know, so much travel had ceased, but that also really affected the cargo and the shipping across the globe. And as everybody knows, pharma is such a global business. We really prided ourselves on having a domestic and Western European supply chain to keep things relatively short. And we definitely saw the benefit of that in terms of delivering medication in short order when there's no flights going and when cargo transport has really slowed down. We were seeing huge gaps in the marketplace and the ability to deliver drugs to hospitals and clinicians. So we really prided ourselves on trying to be as forward-sighted as possible and make sure that we can deliver medication in a timely manner when things such as pandemics and border shutdowns and everything occurs. So really do like to give kudos to our Nexus team on the ability to continue to provide medication during this time. And then lastly, on our last slide, what I really want to kind of focus on is what brought us to BioForward, which is our project tomorrow. So that's a rendering of our facility that's nearly complete. It's a sterile manufacturing, about 85,000 square feet fill finish facility with 2 filling lines. We broke ground back in the summer of 2019, and hopefully in March we'll be getting our temporary occupancy permit. So looking at a really fast turnaround time for a facility of this size. We begin validating equipment in the spring and hoping to start producing commercial product at the end of this year, beginning of next year. What's really unique about the plant is it's a fully greenfield project with isolator technology, state-of-the-art fill finish capability, as well as freeze drying and terminal sterilization, as well as our second line that's going in the facility is going to be a pre-filled syringe line, which is the ability to fill not only pre-filled syringes, needleless, as well as cartridges, and really kind of opens the gamut of everything that we can do at the facility, not only for ourselves, but hopefully in the future, maybe for some other customers as well. We're still very much committed to providing safe, affordable, effective medication at the facility, but we've definitely reserved some of the line and have the capacity to bring on emergency fill finish programs. And much like some of the other companies that have presented today, we've been in talks with BARDA and the Health and Human Services about providing stockpile as well as other necessary things to, we firmly believe, to combat the future pandemic. Because although we're really living in the COVID-19 time, there's nothing to say and almost impossible not to say that there will be another pandemic in the future. And bringing on more fill finish capability is going to be critical to provide the doses as we grow to, I think, over 8 billion people globally, as well as our domestic demand. We really need to make sure that we have that, and Nexus is right there on the forefront to provide more and more domestic, not only medicines that we're producing, but as well as hopefully in the future vaccines and other therapies that can be made for Americans in America. And we're really hopeful, and please feel free to visit our website, nexuspharma.net. You can actually see a live cam of the building going up. And we'd love to have, once everything's settled down, everyone come and take a look at what we've built and how we can continue to grow. It's on about a 16-acre plot, so this is just phase 1. We're planning on adding 4 more filling lines and more manufacturing and warehouse space in the near future as we continue to expand.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, this is Lisa. I'm just going to interrupt and welcome Nexus to come into Wisconsin and to Pleasant Prairie. We think it's great that you have now come into Wisconsin, and we all look forward to working with you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the new site. That'll be really exciting. So our next speaker is Brad Peets, the Executive VP and Chief Laboratory Officer of Versity.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for the invitation to speak and to share Versity's efforts to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. For those of you who are not familiar with Versity or only have a little bit of knowledge about who Versity is, I'll provide a brief introduction. Since just after World War II, we've been headquartered in Milwaukee, and as an organization, we are focused on innovating around blood health. Over the past 5 years, we've expanded our reach significantly, and now we have staff numbering at around 2,000 employees that are located in the states of Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and now most recently Texas. We focus our efforts at Versity around improving patient outcomes in 4 primary clinical segments, and those are transfusion medicine, transplantation, hematology, and oncology. And we make this impact in these 4 clinical segments through operational expertise that we've gained over the last 70 plus years in blood collection. As most of you probably know us as, we're the 5th largest blood collector in the United States. We collect about nearly 700,000 donations annually. But we are also have great expertise and a long history in clinical diagnostics, clinical trial support, organ and tissue procurement, and direct clinical care through the physicians that work for Versity and nurses and other healthcare professionals. Next slide, please. So this diversity of expertise and capabilities that we have within Versity has uniquely positioned us to make positive impact in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic in 3 primary areas of impact. And those are therapeutics, which are shown in this slide, diagnostics, and in research. And so since early August, we've tested more than 200,000 of our blood donors across the 5 states that we collect blood in for antibodies to the SARS-CoV-2 virus. This has allowed us to identify more than 14,000 potential convalescent plasma donors. And as a result, we've been able to recruit these antibody positive individuals to donate COVID-19 convalescent plasma. And as of this slide's already out of date from when I made it a few days ago. I think we're over 21,000 units now have been provided to patients across the 5 states, and we've even exported some of this convalescent plasma outside of our 5-state area when it's needed by our partners. Next slide, please. We've also manufactured more than 5 million kits containing the stabilizing media that Randy described, I think in the second presentation. And this allows for the protected transport of the nasopharyngeal swabs that he also spoke of from the collection site to the testing site that are used in the detection of a viral infection. So we've provided these test kits to testing agencies all over the world in nearly every continent. We've also been asked to apply our expertise in platelet clotting and thrombosis diagnostics, as clinicians have begun to recognize in the middle of this pandemic that both increased bleeding and clotting events are associated with the most severe COVID-19 disease. And this is an area that we have great depth of expertise gained over the 70 years of our organization. Next slide. So finally, Versity makes significant investments in both basic and translational research. And we do this through our Blood Research Institute, which is located in Wauwatosa and is directly adjacent around the medical campus that CC described earlier as well. And in this location, we have a little more than 125 basic research scientists that do basic research. We have our Medical Sciences Institute, which houses nearly 30 physicians, full-time physicians that work within our institution and also with our partner institutions like the Medical College of Wisconsin. These researchers have rapidly pivoted since the beginning of the pandemic, some of their research efforts towards understanding COVID-19 and developing therapies to treat the disease. Our organization also has a long history of supporting clinical trials, and we've been involved in generating data and providing biologistic support towards bringing novel COVID-19 diagnostic and therapeutic inventions to patient application for application to COVID-19 disease. So finally, in closing, I would share that while 2020 has easily been the most challenging year of my career, it was also the most fulfilling to date. I'm sure the rest of the panel would agree with this assessment. To be working for an organization that was able to rapidly make broad impact in mitigating the greatest pandemic of our lifetime. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. You know, Versity is such a great resource for the state and for the whole Midwest. So we're glad to have you join us today. Our final speaker of the day is Jen Romanen, the Senior Director of IVD Operations at Promega.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Tom, for leaving me a few minutes from the beginning. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm really excited to be here to represent Promega and specifically the operations teams here, where I've been working for the last 27 years. So if you could go ahead and move to the next slide. First, I'd like to provide just a quick overview of Promega for those of you who are not familiar with our company. So we primarily manufacture reagents and instruments used in molecular and cellular biology. Next slide. And we serve a number of customers. We're doing basic research, studying human health and disease, pharmaceutical companies developing drugs and vaccines, forensic scientists in the DNA identification field, clinical diagnostics labs that are running the tests, such as the COVID PCR tests, and applied market customers that may be testing food, water, or other environments for contaminants. Even in this business area, we are supporting work in COVID-19 with the wastewater testing efforts that are going on. Next slide. So over the 4,000 catalog products that Promega manufactures, about 50 of those, as well as a significant number of our custom products, have served various needs in the COVID-19 pandemic. Our primary tools and technologies are in clinical diagnostics, where we developed a serology test, and our materials are part of around 2/3 of the COVID PCR tests that are available on the market today globally. Our primary products and technologies are for sample prep, so extracting the RNA from the nasal swab, for example, and sample analysis, which is determining if the purified RNA is from COVID-19. Next slide. So as you might imagine, the quick acceleration of demand impacted all areas of operations, as with every company here. We increased production over tenfold for some products. We've hired over 100 people, and we still have positions open if you go to our website. We've integrated new automated dispensing lines, production lines, and all without sacrificing quality. For example, this year, we manufactured the equivalent of over 45 years worth of one of our products when compared to our same demand for that product last year. In addition, we doubled our overall units sold while decreasing our already low complaint rate. One of our customers who was recently highlighted in a Promega Connections blog said, "For the past 10 years, everyone in large diagnostic labs has been talking about efficiency, lean management, and just-in-time delivery. But that backfires when you're facing a pandemic of this scale." While we also implement lean and efficient processes like all manufacturing companies, our strategy that we've had since the inception of Promega over 40 years ago is to prioritize investing in the future. So in additional facility white space, additional capacity on our production lines, a high level of vertical integration, and higher levels of raw material inventory than one might traditionally see in a manufacturing organization. In addition, we're really proud we have amazing employees, many of whom have been with us for over 10 to 15 years, and long-term partnerships with our vendors that we were able to leverage as we had to continue to scale up over the last year. Next slide. So as with everyone else here, our work is not done. In fact, just yesterday, we announced that some of our instruments and reagents used in the sample prep process are now part of the CDC's authorized multiplex or combined test for COVID-19 and influenza. So we're continuously striving to find new ways to support this pandemic. Next slide. Here's just a closer look at the process for manufacturing the reagent kit that's part of that CDC test protocol. As you can see here, there's significant complexity to manufacture these products. When one asks, why did our industry take so long to scale up at the beginning of this pandemic? We think this is a good example to share. As you can see here, this single catalog product requires the scale up of 60 raw materials, including chemicals and plastic molded parts from 29 suppliers across the globe, and dozens of processes that include both manual and automated steps. Next slide. So in order to maintain a high level of quality, each step must be scaled carefully and quickly. This requires all of our teams to work closely and leverage the quality systems that we've built over the last few decades. Next slide. And finally, here you can see just a few of our facilities located in the Madison-Fitchburg area. Each one of these is currently being built or expanded. These are projects that were either in process before the pandemic or needed as a result of our lessons learned from the pandemic. So we're proud to say that we're going to continue our philosophy of investing for the future unknowns. Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer. And thanks to everybody. Thanks to all of our speakers today. You know, the pandemic has been this unprecedented time in our society, and as you can see, our companies, our members, our industry has really stepped up to the challenge. It's really impressive to see all the amazing things that are being done here in Wisconsin. I just wanted to say, if anybody has any questions, please continue to drop them into chat. We have about 20 minutes left for questions. And Risa, could you just move the slide one more time? Because in case anybody has to leave right now, I wanted to make sure that we got one last plug in for our next event, which is all about the COVID-19 vaccine. Registrations are open for that, so please register. Now, we did have a couple hiccups in the questions, so some of you may have asked a question and had them answered, but maybe not seen the answer. Our panelists have been diligently answering a lot of questions, so if you haven't seen an answer to your question, go ahead and post it again. But the first question that I saw, I can't really see exactly how it was worded, so forgive me if I'm butchering your words, but several companies have talked about how they're hiring right now, which is great. How has the hiring process been going during the pandemic? Have things slowed down, or are things exactly where you expect them to be? How has hiring been during the pandemic? And this is open to anybody.
Well, since I was one of the ones that raised it, I can have a crack at answering part of the question. So it has been interesting. We've actually been doing quite well keeping on track with our hiring program, which is an accelerated program. We've had to get quite creative. We've significantly increased the size of our talent acquisition team. We are certainly looking closely locally, but also in neighboring states, and seeing some success there. One of the things we have seen, though, is that our voluntary turnover rate has dropped quite significantly. And whilst we'd love to take credit for that, for some of the engagement things we've been doing, I suspect that in part, some of that would be due to employees, not wanting to take risks and move jobs at the moment. So we may be seeing some of that. Final thing is, like in some of the creative things, we did a virtual job fair late last week, and that was very successful for us. It looks like we're going to get almost a dozen good hires just from that one event. So things like that.
Great. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would say for Promega, our hiring also has been going quite well. I don't know if others experience this, but certainly at the beginning, when people weren't quite sure how long this would last, there were a number of sort of initial hires that then, would return after furloughs. And so we went through a full sort of hiring and rehiring almost in those first few months. And now we're happy to say we're settled in, and I feel similarly that we're seeing a lot of the employees that we're hiring sticking with us, and hopefully will continue, of course, as the pandemic hopefully goes away not too long from now. So we're pleased with how the hiring process has been going, even virtually, as it's been going virtually. Yeah.
This is Tom with Aldevron. I just wanted to mention that I think we've had to all think about how to reinvent our hiring process this time, because hiring is a difficult thing. I mean, it's people experience what it would be like at a company, and us, trying to make sure there's a good partnership with the candidate. So we've really invented how we recruit. I know Lisa loves videos. We put together a recruiting video, which has been really successful. And so that has helped us out, if any of you have seen that. But one thing I wanted to mention, LinkedIn had an article recently that Madison is competing very strongly for technical talent in the country. And I think it's like 74% up as far as inbound technical talent coming into Madison. As it relates to LinkedIn job kind of locations. I mean, they have the biggest database for this in the world. So like their data is pretty good. And I want to say that, San Francisco was down like 35% and Boston was down 18%. So I think it's a good opportunity for people looking for a different maybe lifestyle to move to a biotech hub like Madison. So I think it's really kind of go time for all of us as far as that. And just want to continue to suggest that BioForward should keep that as a strong initiative, because I think, talent is what makes our companies go, along with our culture and serving markets that are growing. So thanks, Lisa, for that initiative.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I really appreciate that. And I also like to expand that to Milwaukee as well, because certainly this whole hub it extends from Madison, Milwaukee, and of course our supply chain going all the way up through Fox Valley, throughout the state, which we're all using within this entire talent and recruiting, the whole biomanufacturing. It's something that makes us stand out. But thanks, Tom, for those comments, because we do have several board members on here that have really pushed to have this talent and national PR campaign that not just for talent, but it can be for partnerships, for investments. You know, we have young companies on here that are looking also for investment dollars. So the more that we can put positive messaging out there about Wisconsin, that attracts a lot of different types of activities coming in here, and talent certainly is number one, but I know Randy and some others are looking for investment or partnership. So thanks for that. Thanks for that, Tom.
Even as a small company, as I mentioned during my presentation, we hired over 30 people in the last few months. So it's been really quite an interesting ride. And by the way, anybody knows an accountant, we're looking.
No wonder it's been so difficult for academic labs to get technical support. You guys are grabbing them all.
Well,
Hey, can I ask a question? I have a question for Tom. Tom, you had in your presentation that you know, we have all the different types of vaccines, different approaches to vaccination, and I thought you made the statement that eventually they'll be going to be testing on which vaccine is the best as far as an individual, right? But isn't that really long term? Like, is the Pfizer better for someone, or the mRNA approach is better for one way? I know Johnson & Johnson's going to come out soon with a different approach. And are you saying that it could be better for some other individuals? But isn't that really long term clinical trials to understand that? And where we're kind of in this rush right now. So I was just curious. I just wanted a little more information on where you were going with that as far as vaccines for particular individuals.
Yeah, and so, you know, Aldevron is making a lot of these raw materials, and our clients are making the vaccines, and the doctors are, you know, prescribing them, or they're running these vaccination programs. You know, some of the vaccines are viral vector based, and there are some people that have immunity to some of these viral vectors. And so a viral vector approach may not work for certain population segments. So I was speaking specifically about that.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
All right. Another question that I saw that was posed to Randy, but I think I'll kind of open it up to everybody. It was, how do you see future kits and customers post COVID-19 with what you've developed for the current pandemic? Like relevant for, you know, products that you've developed now, are you able to keep them relevant for future different viruses, or you know, how are you able to take what you've made here during the pandemic and keep it moving along post-pandemic?
Well, you take a look at what Genturi has done from the remote sample collection. We started in the forensics area, and I've been in there over the last 30 years, collecting samples from a point of collection to the laboratory. And now as we get into the medical area and now into the infectious disease area, this is becoming much more important into those areas. So what I'm seeing is that literally this now just spiking what we've been doing over the past 10 to 20 years, and now taking what we've done and just put it on steroids. So what we're able to do now is, you know, for example, I said our next one will inactivate the virus and then be able to store the RNA in that and they get that in. So we're seeing a good integration between the point of collection into an automated process. And as a matter of fact, some things we still can't even talk about is taking that to a point where we won't even need the laboratory and actually be able to do real time, almost like a pregnancy type test, right at the spot to screen things. So COVID has just really explained or exacerbated everything that we're doing, not just for viruses, but for a lot of molecular genetic testing as well.
Interesting. Does anybody else have anything to say along those lines?
Yeah, Mike, this is Jim. I think that kind of ability to morph from COVID to looking at applications in different areas applies to the therapeutic companies as well. For example, you know, once we pick up additional safety data and have an open IND, the the ability to move back towards neuroscience and multiple sclerosis and Alzheimer's and things becomes very much accelerated. So, you're doing the right thing now and helping find solutions for the pandemic, but you're also positioning the company for some acceleration in the future with that baseline work that's being done.
Yeah, I
Mike,
feel like this whole acceleration in the research world has been kind of a good thing. I mean, it can be a double-edged sword because doing things fast means there might be more opportunity for errors, et cetera. But boy, things are going at a pace that I don't think we've ever seen before. And I agree that it's going to be a big advantage if this pace stays.
Was there someone else that had something to add? I thought I heard a voice.
I just was going to mention it regarding pivoting. I mentioned it with the CRISPR DX that swapping out the guide RNA for a different viral sequence or a different pathogen is something that's relatively quick to do, and so it's that is like a platform for detection. mRNA is like a platform for manufacturing. So you see this, platforms are typically situations where you can modify them to serve bigger populations, but also pivot quicker, as opposed to just having a one-to-one relationship between a drug and a disease. And so I think the industry is learning how to make things more flexible, just like all of us in our lives, at home and in general with this pandemic.
Yeah, Tom, I agree. I think from the Promega front, I mean, the majority of what we've been selling, a significant number of products that we've been scaling up, we've actually been making for a really long time, and the platforms have been there for a really long time. Our serological assay that was more recently worked on is based off of a newer technology or platform, but there were already plenty of other assays in the mix, that we'd like to build off that platform. It was really just a matter of saying, right now we're going to focus on the COVID-19 assay that's needed. So those others will come when time comes for that. So yeah, I agree.
Okay, great, thanks. The next question I saw was to Brad. Brad, there's so much in the news. I mean, we're constantly hearing about how we've hit record numbers of hospitalizations or deaths. But we know that a lot of these therapies that have been developed, we've gotten better at fighting COVID-19. Do you have any thoughts or statistics about the convalescent plasma program in particular, about like how many people this has helped, how many you've administered to? Some good news.
Yes. So as I shared in my presentation, we have been able to rapidly identify convalescent plasma donors across the Versiti footprint, nearly 15,000 at this point. So that's sort of a good news, bad news. We've identified more and more of these potential donors because more and more people are being infected. And Wisconsin, unfortunately, leads the way in our footprint. We just looked at the most recent data. We're testing in Wisconsin in our blood donor population about 15% positivity rate, which is up from when we started in August. We were in a 1 to 2% rate. So every week it's going up by 2 to 3% in the most recent weeks, and I expect that to carry on because that's sort of a lagging indicator of infection. The antibody, the person developing antibodies and then feeling well enough to donate blood is probably 6 weeks removed. So I think we're seeing a lagging indicator here. But the good news is these people after recovering from their COVID infection are motivated to donate plasma, and they're doing it in big numbers for our organization and to the benefit of all of our partner hospitals that we work with. So there are still there was an online question that CC helped answer as well. There are studies being published quite regularly. They're not, over time, over the history of the pandemic, we've gotten more sophisticated in the way we collect the convalescent plasma, the way we're able to measure the antibody titers in these convalescent plasma, and the ways in which we're able to identify which patients will most benefit from that. So the jury's still out on the efficacy of the convalescent plasma, but as Cecilia just shared, there was a New England Journal of Medicine article. I haven't read it yet, but I think Cecilia, maybe if you want to share, I think there was some positive news in that.
Trying to do too many things at once. Go back to the paper and unmute myself. Yeah, it was a nicely sized study about over 3,000 participants, and they were mostly looking sort of at dose, but certainly the risk of death was lower particularly in a group that got a high antibody titer than a low antibody titer group. So again, I think the theme that it needs to be given early rather than later. Once somebody's already on ventilation, it is not nearly as effective, but that fits with what we know an antibody will do. So I think it's really promising.
Great. All right, good to hear. Well, thank you. So we're kind of running out of time. The last question is kind of a vaccine distribution. So the country had sort of less desirable distribution.
I think you're breaking up.
Oh, I'm breaking up. Excuse me.
Now you're better.
Okay. So so we've had some hiccups with vaccine distribution in the country, and someone asked, are there any processes or best practices? And people talked about you being able to successfully utilize their supply chain here in Wisconsin. Any of these things that could be applied to a more efficient vaccine distribution in Wisconsin or the U.S. in general? Any thoughts?
Well, I had responded certainly that at Promega and other organizations where we have a strong cold chain distribution process, that we have subject matter experts that would be happy to talk with whomever about how we manage that. There are, just like all of these processes, so many details around this. With the type of vaccine that's being distributed at what temperature, which is my understanding that some of these can be delivered at different temperatures and then, used for different amounts of times. You can imagine the variables. So unless there's other organizations here, without knowing what the overall plan is, I don't think any one of us could accurately provide any type of guidance. But just like many of us have been involved in collaborations, for example, with the university and other projects, this would be a collaboration that we'd be happy to be involved in if we could support something.
Yeah, it's a big undertaking, lots of variables, like you said. Does anyone have any other thoughts or any final parting words? If not, then I will go ahead and again thank all of our panelists here. Thank you all very much for taking the time to talk about your companies a little bit and let us know all the amazing things that you've done during the pandemic. So thank you again. And thank you all for attending. And please remember to register for our next event coming up in a little under 2 weeks on the coronavirus vaccine. Oh,
yep.
Lisa?
Yeah, the 26th. That's all I was going to say. But thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. And thanks for everyone attending. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Risa.